A quiet street in Warrington. Early morning, just frost on windscreens and a van ticking heat. Across the road, a plain unit, branded windows, lights off. Future Press Limited. On paper, a promotional goods company. T-shirts, banners, marketing materials. Inside, there was no one moving, not yet. But behind those walls were names, ledgers, and weight. More than anyone on that street could guess. Police had been watching for months. Every delivery, every face, every van, waiting for the right moment. Not to catch a single deal, but to cut the power at the top. Because the men behind it weren't corner boys. They weren't street dealers taking risks for quick cash. They were something else entirely. This is the story of Leon and Anthony Cullen, and how two brothers built a criminal empire behind locked doors and business fronts. Built it once, lost it, then built it again, stronger, smarter, and almost untouchable. But to understand how they built an empire behind locked doors, you need to go back to where it started, in a town caught between two cities. Welcome to UK True Crime Files, where we dig into the cases that scar Britain's communities, giving voice to the victims at their heart. If you're new here, please subscribe. Your support keeps these stories coming straight to your feed. Leave a comment below with your thoughts on this case. It starts conversations that matter. Longford sat on the northern edge of Warrington, rows of red brick homes, broken curbs, and the quiet tension of a town caught between two cities. Liverpool to the west, Manchester to the east. It wasn't gangland, but you didn't have to go far to find it. Leon and Anthony Cullen were born here in 1987. Identical twins, but sharply different temperaments. Anthony was the smoother one. The type teachers said had potential. He stayed calm, kept smiling, stayed out of trouble, at least where people could see. Leon was different, intense, quick to anger. As a teenager, he bounced between being the life of the party and the one to fear. People didn't know whether to laugh with him or stay out of his way. But what they shared was ambition and loyalty. You never saw one without the other. From the schoolyard to Friday night bus rides into town, they moved like a unit. Their parents weren't criminals. No gang ties, no reputation. But the streets didn't care. During the late 90s and early 2000s, the Northwest drug trade was exploding. Manchester and Liverpool were bleeding turf wars into surrounding towns, and Warrington felt the pressure. Class A was everywhere, and the people pushing it, they didn't look poor. Flash watches, BMWs, designer jackets. The dealers looked like stars, so you had two brothers, identical twins, but with sharply different temperaments, both watching the Northwest drug trade explode around them. The Cullen twins were watching. They started small, like most do, but even in those early moves, there was calculation. They weren't just chasing quick money. They wanted more. Not just the cash, but the structure, the reputation, the control. By 18, they were done playing small. They were building contacts, quiet ones, mostly through Liverpool. And every mistake they saw another dealer make, they learned from it. And they weren't going to be reckless. They were going to be professional. By their early 20s, they weren't just moving product for someone else anymore. They were running their own operation, and they'd found the perfect cover. Their first front was called Spot On Signs. On paper, it was a print and signage company. Logos, banners, branded gear for local businesses. Legitimate on the surface. But inside, it was the cover for a growing Class A operation. A place to move money, hide stock, and keep things looking clean. And here's what separated the Cullens from most street-level dealers. They kept records, spreadsheets of who owed what, how much had moved, what still had to be paid. Everything was documented, everything had its place. It wasn't just crime, it was a business. And they ran it like one. But police were watching too. In late 2010, Cheshire Police launched Operation Cortex, a full-scale covert investigation. Surveillance teams, informants, undercover officers, all working to track what the Cullen brothers had built. They found stash houses across Warrington, burner phones cycling every few weeks, safe locations where product was held before distribution, couriers making regular runs from Liverpool into Warrington, always the same routes, always careful. Within 2 years of setting up Spot On Signs, the Cullens had built a network that moved Class A across the Northwest. But Cheshire Police were already watching. Leon stayed in the background. He didn't handle the drugs himself, but he gave the orders. He made the decisions. Anthony managed the day-to-day, keeping things moving, keeping people in line. In early 2011, police carried out raids across Warrington. They searched several properties tied to the brothers. They found cocaine, cash, phones, and those detailed records. The records were key. They showed who worked where, who owed what, and who answered to who. Leon was arrested, and later convicted of conspiracy to supply Class A drugs. Prosecutors said he ran the whole thing, a central figure in the region's supply line. He was sentenced to 9 years and 8 months. Anthony wasn't picked up at first. He stepped in during Leon's absence, tried to keep things moving. But it didn't last. Within a year, a second police operation brought him down too. He was found at a processing site, a caravan fitted with equipment, scales, and blocks of high-purity product. Anthony was sentenced to 5.5 years. It looked like the Cullen chapter was closed. Both brothers behind bars, network dismantled, case solved. But prison wasn't the end, it was the reset. Most criminals come out of prison either broken or reckless. The Cullen twins came out with a plan, and this time they wouldn't make the same mistakes. By 2015, both Cullen brothers were out. No fanfare, no visible wealth. They'd learned, no flash cars parked outside their homes, no designer gear that drew attention. They stayed quiet, and they got back to work. The new front was called Future Press Limited. On paper, another promotional goods company. T-shirts, branded merchandise, corporate marketing kits. Looked legitimate, felt legitimate, and that was the point. In reality, it was a money laundering operation, covering a drug network that stretched far beyond Warrington, and from Merseyside and Greater Manchester to North Wales and the North East. This wasn't a local operation anymore. This was regional. And the structure was tighter than before. Much tighter. Leon kept completely out of sight. He acted more like a company director than a drug dealer. Never touched product, never met couriers, never showed his face where it mattered. He gave orders, but from a distance. Anthony ran the day-to-day operations, personnel, logistics, security. He kept people in line, made sure deliveries happened on time, made sure problems were dealt with quickly. Beneath them were trusted lieutenants. Each one had a clear role. Chris Houghton handled the gang's weapons, rifles, handguns, shotguns, even hand grenades and silencers. He managed the movement, storage, and supply of firearms. I made sure the network had muscle when it needed it. Shah Ryan operated on the enforcement side, debt collection, intimidation. The kind of work that kept people quiet, kept payments coming in, and reminded others to stay in line. Matthew Spencer, Nigel Gurker, and Chris Potter. They handled transport and logistics. They moved large sums of cash across counties. They managed deliveries between stash houses, couriers, and the main operation. Their roles were quiet, but vital. So the second time around, the Cullens built something more sophisticated, a network that stretched across 4 regions and moved like a legitimate corporation. Others managed key support areas, running safe flats, storing product, moving gear on command. Steve Cowell, Robert Bibby, Michael Mason. They worked across these functions. Josh Mercer, Steve Wood, Christopher LaRosa. They focused on movement and delivery. Dylan McVan, Liam King, Gary White. They provided hands-on help, moving between roles as needed. Most of them didn't know the full picture. They worked in fragments, one task, one name, one van. It kept the operation secure. The logic behind it was simple. If something slipped, only a small piece was exposed, and the product itself, high-purity Class A, better than most of what was already on the street. They didn't cut it, didn't dilute it. That purity gave them an edge. Buyers noticed, and so did their rivals. At its height, the network was making up to £290,000 a month. This wasn't just cash stuffed in boxes. It was cleaned, managed, and put back into the business. They paid wages, monthly, with bonuses. There were rules, expectations, and penalties. This time, they moved product with precision. Security protocols were strict. No online presence, no names on anything. Encrypted phones, changed vehicles often, moved between safe houses. Even the storage locations were swapped regularly, always trying to keep distance between themselves and the product. But while they were building this new empire with military precision, police were building something too. And this time, they had all the time in the world. It started quietly. By 2016, police knew something serious was operating in Warrington. Movements were too precise. Money was moving fast, but there were no mistakes. No obvious trails. They needed more than suspicion. They needed structure. That's when Operation Samurai began. Cheshire Police launched it as a deep surveillance mission. Long-term, resource-heavy, and aimed directly at the Cullen brothers. This wasn't a quick raid. This was 18 months of watching, recording, and piecing together every connection. Officers tracked the network piece by piece. Couriers, vehicles, delivery patterns, meetings that lasted minutes, drop-offs where nothing changed hands visibly, but everything moved. Phones were monitored, addresses recorded and watched, again and again. They watched men enter flats empty-handed and leave with bags. They watched vans leave with one set of plates and return with different ones. It was methodical, slow, patient. And the Cullens never touched the gear. Every connection was layered. Someone to move it, someone else to hold it, another to collect. No one knew the full chain except the Cullens themselves. For 18 months, an Operation Samurai tracked every movement, and what they found wasn't just a local drug network. It was a supply line connected to one of Britain's biggest wholesale operations. The deeper police dug, the clearer the scale became. This wasn't just a Warrington operation. It fed into something much bigger. Intelligence began to link the Cullens to Liverpool's Tobin brothers, Alan and John. The Tobins weren't street dealers. They were masterminds behind a national drug supply network. Wholesalers, and the Cullens were their regular clients. In the next few days, I'll make a detailed video on the Tobin brothers as well. So make sure you hit the notification bell to get updates once it's published. Surveillance captured a quiet meeting in the countryside. Anthony Cullen, John Tobin, Robbie Broughton, and Robert Bibby. No drugs exchanged, no money visible, just a calm conversation over tea, with a van parked nearby. Then came the M6. In August 2018, the biggest land drug seizure in UK history happened. 186 kilograms of 90% pure cocaine, hidden in a van's false floor. Value, over £20 million. I've published a video on this earlier, so make sure you check that as well. By early 2019, the surveillance was done. Warrants were signed, phones were tapped, safe houses were mapped. The brothers had built their empire in silence. Now it was about to be dismantled in one coordinated strike. On the morning of January 10, 2018, dozens of officers moved simultaneously across the northwest. Within hours, the Cullen network would be in custody, except for one man. The strikes came fast. On the morning of January 10, 2018, Cheshire Police moved in. Operation Samurai had run for more than a year. Now it was time to end it. Raids were carried out across Warrington and beyond. Entry teams hit properties at the same time. Safe houses, stash flats, transport points. No warnings. No knock and wait. Anthony Cullen was arrested without incident. Police found him at one of the key properties identified during Operation Samurai. His arrest was one of the first, a crucial step that signaled the collapse of the leadership. But while Anthony was in custody, his twin brother was already gone. Leon Cullen was nowhere to be found. Police believed he'd slipped out just days before the operation began. No trace, no phone, no bank trail, no digital presence. Surveillance turned up nothing. Within 24 hours, most of the Cullen network was in custody. Weapons, drugs, and cash seized from addresses across the northwest. But the architect was missing. Chris Houghton, the gang's armourer, was arrested first. Inside his flat, officers found multiple firearms, pistols, automatic rifles, silencers, hidden behind a false wall. It confirmed everything police already suspected. This wasn't just a drug crew, it was armed, structured, and dangerous. Shah Ryan was found days later. He'd been seen watching one of the Cullen safe locations, not drawing attention. Police moved in and took him, and the drugs. Matthew Spencer had already been stopped on the A1, caught with £14,950 in cash, hidden under floor panels in his van. No explanation given. Nigel Gurker was arrested separately, caught carrying £43,700 in cash, zipped into a sports bag. Again, no explanation. As the raids expanded, more names were picked up. Chris Potter, Josh Mercer, Gary White, Michael Mason, arrested in homes and vehicles across the northwest. Robert Bibby, considered one of the Cullen gang's inner circle, was also detained. Quickly moved into protective custody as tensions escalated. Search teams recovered encrypted handsets, burner phones, substantial quantities of high-purity cocaine, along with drug ledgers and movement schedules. In multiple addresses, they found concealed compartments. false floors, hidden wall panels, magnetized trap doors. Police didn't just want the product. They wanted the people, the roles, the system. And with each arrest, the map became clearer. The operation was no longer just a network. It was evidence, stacked, labeled, and building towards court. But Leon's absence created a problem. Warrants were issued, international alerts followed. Months passed, silence. Leon had always kept himself a step removed. Not just from the product, but from exposure. No social media, no flashy profile. Most of the gang didn't have direct access to him. He moved through intermediaries. That made tracking him harder. The theory was simple. He'd fled abroad. But where? Police worked with national and international agencies. Europol, Interpol, Border Control. Bit by bit, fragments emerged. A pattern of aliases, forged documents, rented properties. Not enough to act, but enough to keep the net open. It would take nearly 2 years, cooperation with international agencies, and a tip from the other side of the world before Leon Cullen's face appeared on a surveillance camera again. It took nearly 2 years. Police worked with Europol, Interpol, border control units across Europe and the Middle East. Slowly, fragments emerged, aliases, forged documents, a pattern of rented properties under false identities. Not enough to move on, but enough to keep searching. Then, in early 2020, a lead came in. Leon Cullen had been spotted in Dubai, living under a false identity, renting a flat in a high-rise block far from Warrington. Surveillance confirmed it. Officers coordinated with Emirati authorities. The arrest was swift. He didn't resist. Leon Cullen was flown back to the UK under armed escort. The man who had once sat at the top of one of Britain's most structured drug cartels was finally behind bars. And his return changed everything. With both Cullen brothers in custody, the final phase could begin, building the case that would take them and their entire network to court. But with the Cullens in custody, Warrington didn't get safer. In fact, it got worse. Because removing the top of a criminal empire doesn't end the violence. Sometimes it just removes the control. The takedown didn't end the violence. In the weeks after the Cullen raids, Warrington didn't get quieter. It got worse. With the whole network arrested, the structure collapsed, but not the tension. The Cullen network had dominated the local trade. Without them, others saw opportunity. Rivals moved quickly. Safe houses were hit. Couriers vanished. Families were watched. The message was clear. Territory was up for grabs. Police recorded a rise in targeted violence. A grenade was thrown outside a family home. A man was shot in a drive-by. Another shooting took place outside a barber shop in broad daylight. Robert Bibby, one of the Cullen gang's inner circle, was placed under police protection after credible threats emerged. Detectives feared he was being hunted by a rival group, trying to dismantle the remnants of the network. The Cullen network had kept things quiet through control and intimidation. With them gone, that control vanished, and rivals moved fast. For Warrington, it marked a dangerous turning point. What had once been quiet and controlled turned volatile. Power had been removed, but not replaced. Police increased patrols. Armed response teams were deployed across high-risk zones. Surveillance units were reactivated. This time, not just to monitor organized crime, but to prevent a turf war. As Warrington tried to stabilize, another story was unfolding inside Liverpool Crown Court, where the full scale of what the Cullens had built was finally being laid bare. May 14, 2021. Liverpool Crown Court. The prosecution presented a formidable case. It was a portrait of an organized criminal corporation, operating across the northwest and beyond. The defense responses varied. Leon Cullen, appearing by video link, claimed he wasn't directly involved in day-to-day operations, that his designer items, his Rolex, were personal possessions, not evidence of large-scale crime. Others argued they were peripheral players, unaware of the wider conspiracy, just doing jobs, not understanding what they were part of. And these defenses carried little weight with the court. The judge described the enterprise as a sophisticated, well-planned, and persistent criminal operation. Wholesale supply of high-purity cocaine, a lethal cache of firearms, and intimidation that rattled the local community. He began with Anthony Cullen, aged 33. Labeled him a co-founder and logistics leader. Anthony received 27 years in prison. Next came Chris Houghton, the gang's appointed armorer. Sentenced to 20 years. Leon Cullen, aged 33, was identified as the strategic head. the one who pulled the strings from a distance and facilitated the network. He received a sentence of 22 years and 6 months. The sentences reflected both the scale and sophistication. 27 years for Anthony, 22 for Leon, and over 185 years combined for the entire network. Robert Bibby, a lieutenant involved in enforcement and logistics, received 13 years. Shah Ryan, linked to intimidation and debt collection, was handed 14 years. Matthew Spencer, responsible for moving large sums of money, got 12 years. Nigel Gurka was given 11 years. Chris Potter, Josh Mercer, Gary White, and Michael Mason, who managed transport and stash operations, were sentenced individually to terms ranging from 10 to 12 years. The combined sentencing total exceeded 185 years across all defendants. But the courtroom wasn't the final message. Before the case closed, Cheshire Police launched something unusual, a public awareness campaign. They displayed aged mugshots across Warrington, digital projections showing how Leon and Anthony Cullen would look at the end of their prison terms. The goal was simple: cut through the myths of fast money and respect. Show young people considering similar paths what the real endgame looks like. Not wealth, not power, just decades behind bars and a life reduced to a mugshot on a wall. The Cullen case wasn't just about drugs or money. It was about structure, patience, and the reality that criminal empires, real ones, require genuine effort to dismantle. Operation Samurai took 18 months, longer than most criminal networks last before they self-destruct, longer than most surveillance operations can sustain resources for. But Cheshire Police stayed with it, because they knew what they were dealing with. The aged mugshot campaign represented a shift in policing messaging, from reactive enforcement to preventive communication, showing consequences, not just arrests, making the endgame visible before someone steps onto that path. Warrington today is still dealing with organized crime. That didn't disappear. But the Cullen network specifically, that's been dismantled permanently. Both brothers will be elderly men when they're released. The empire they built twice is gone,